Great. So welcome to the Human Wildlife Coexistence interview series, where we'll be joined by members of our conservation program teams. My name is Hannah Klair, and I'm a conservation program coordinator here at ZSL, and will be chairing these interviews. So today on our Coexistence interview series, we are joined by Amy. Thank you for being a part of these talks. Could you just start off by introducing yourself and telling us about the project or species you're working on?
Yeah, thank you for inviting me along for this. So my name is Amy van Gelder. I joined ZSL only last month, actually, as the communication specialist for WildCats Conservation Alliance. And we focus on wild tigers and Amur leopards. We are basically an initiative that was formed through a partnership between ZSL and the Dreamworld Wildlife Foundation, with the aim of saving wild tigers and Amur leopards for future generations. And we raise awareness for the plight of wild cats and also fund really carefully chosen conservation projects.
That's brilliant, thank you. So in terms of what we're focusing on for this series, are there any human-wildlife conflicts in the regions that you work in and with the species that you're working with?
Yeah, so we're supporting projects in a range of countries, so China, Indonesia, Nepal, Thailand, and Russia, and they focus on key conservation activities such as anti-poaching, population monitoring, wildlife health monitoring, education outreach, and of course, conflict mitigation. So as our focus species are carnivores, they are heavily impacted by the growth of human population, and so are often left to compete with us for wild space to live and for food to eat. So if the forest does not provide enough prey, then the tigers and the leopards can stray into human areas and predate upon domestic pets, livestock, and even potentially the human population, which is obviously when conflicts can occur. So the conflict with tigers and leopards is not really like a new phenomenon. However, it is definitely a growing issue, as wildcat populations are increasingly being isolated in kind of like islands of habitat surrounded by these human-dominated landscapes. So obviously land use change is certainly having an impact, and we also have to acknowledge that as we work towards increasing populations of wildcats, specifically the tiger, we need to support the communities living alongside them as we kind of achieve project success in those areas. So yeah, we're working with communities providing advice, assistance, and in some cases compensation to those affected by conflict.
Great, that's really interesting. So you mentioned briefly the different kinds of mitigation implementations that you have done. Could you just tell us a bit more about those and maybe mention some of the success stories that you've had there?
Yeah, so across the 5 countries, we work with 11 different projects, and one particular project, which is focusing a lot on human tiger coexistence, is based in the Parsa National Park in central Nepal. So this is actually a ZSL project that aims to secure the future of tigers beyond the protected area network that they're currently in. So past projects which we have funded have helped to improve tiger security and habitat through Parsa National Park, which has supported around, I think it's a 30% increase in Nepal's tiger population. The success of these past projects has now meant the focus needs to be kind of turned to addressing the potential future escalation of human-tiger conflict. So some mitigation measures which have been taken so far are kind of initially understanding the local community and their attitudes and their needs through surveys, collecting information about socioeconomic conditions of the communities, map of conflict-prone zones, and the knowledge and the attitudes of the people in these areas towards tigers and their conservation. And then a key component of the project is to also reduce buffer zones community costs from living alongside the tigers. So one way of doing this is through participatory habitat management of kind of vital habitat to create a more suitable habitat for tiger prey species. They've also done increase the ability of thousands of community members to access existing human tiger conflict relief funds. So this is a lot of communities find it difficult to often get the compensation that they require. Maybe it's because they don't have the time to fill out the forms, or there's a lack of literacy. So this project also helps to improve the access to those funds. And it's also helping to do things like building predator-proof corrals for their livestock, like the goats, to kind of reduce the cost associating to living alongside big cats. And there's also, the usual multiple awareness raising activities in the community to kind of fostering community support for tiger conservation.
Great, thank you. So would you say that your team is hopeful that reaching coexistence is possible?
Yeah, I think from the surveys that have been done, the responses from the surveys across multiple different projects, I think there seems to be a willingness based on responses to coexist. I think people have been living alongside big predators like these for these communities for hundreds, if not thousands of years. So it's part of the culture, and it's just about how, building the capacity and facilitating the coexistence. It's not really a change of perspective, but more, facilitating what's currently there. So we are definitely hopeful that this is something that can be done.
Great, thank you. And then finally, just what would you say that people could do to support coexistence in the longer term? So maybe people who are listening to this interview, what could they do?
Yeah, so I definitely feel the international community should share more of the burden of protecting vital species like tigers and leopards. The tiger isn't a property of a person or a country. There's a global responsibility to protect these species because we all benefit from them being in the world. So, but yet we don't all pay it equally. Having them there, the burden of it almost. So often the communities forced to give up the most for conservation actually have the least to atone for, in a way. So they need support from the international community. And I think obviously one great way of doing this is supporting conservation organisations such as us at WildCats and ZSL through donations and awareness raising of their work. But also learning to coexist with our own wildlife. And through doing that, find empathy for those attempting to do so with bigger charismatic species, I think is important. We're all confronted by the decision between conflict and coexistence, kind of whether it be through squirrels stealing the bird feed, or foxes digging up the vegetable patch, or even a flying ant invasion. So always kind of look at your own behaviours and find alternative solutions to conflict, and then through that find empathy for those living with those bigger species. And then, of course, becoming more of a conscious consumer is definitely an important aspect. So the purchase of wildlife friendly products, and also advocating for conservation and holding big corporations accountable for their actions, which often do impact the marginalised communities such as those living with human wildlife conflicts. So yeah, I think there's lots to do even if you're not living alongside it. So that's really good that you don't have to feel hopeless and helpless in this situation. Yeah,
definitely very encouraging.
Yeah.
Great. Thank you so much, Amy. That was all really, really interesting, and great to hear from the team at WildCats.
Wonderful. Thank you for inviting us, and good luck with your future interviews.
Thanks.